Picture this, it's October 31st, 1983, Halloween. You just arrived home after a night of trick-or-treating. Your bucket of candy is filled to the brim with delicious sweets and chocolate bars. You decide, it being Halloween, to stay up late and catch the last thing airing on the Walt Disney Channel. On TV there are 2 new short films, part of the Walt Disney Studio Showcase. The first of which is a stop-motion short called Vincent, the story of a boy who pretends to be like his idol, Vincent Price. The short is then followed by another, one that is quite unsettling. It's a live-action adaptation of the Brothers Grimm fairy tale, Hansel and Gretel. The short plays for a little over a half an hour, before ultimately coming to an end. The channel then wishes you a good night, before going off the air. The Hansel and Gretel short disappears without a trace, never to be seen again, leaving you to question if it ever really happened. That is until the film is found and resurfaces online in the year of 2014, 31 years after its initial release. Up until this point, Tim Burton's Hansel and Gretel had become something of an urban legend. Its only other times it was shown within those 31 years was at 2 exhibits based on Tim Burton's work, one in New York City and the other all the way in Paris. But what is Tim Burton's Hansel and Gretel, and why did it go missing for so long? I think I can answer part of that. This short is very much Tim Burton's vision, with many sequences capturing his iconic look and some of the creepier elements from his early days as a director. The short features an all-Asian cast. It tells the story of a poor family made up of a loving father who works as a toy maker, his son and daughter, Hansel and Gretel, and of course an evil stepmother.
Who besides me will bother to teach them their table manners? Will you have animals for children?
The stepmother treats them cruelly while the father does his best to calm her down. The kids are sent to their attic bedroom where the dad visits them at night to cheer them up with a rather creepy hand puppet. The following day, the stepmother attempts to lose the children in the woods only for them to find their way back home. The next day she gives them a toy duck, lying that it's from their father. They take the duck with them into the woods, leaving a path of stones so as not to get lost, but the duck eats each stone they place down. They find themselves lost in the woods and stumble upon a house made entirely of candy. It leaks colorful fluids and the children begin to eat it. At the house they are greeted by the evil stepmother, now disguised as a witch. She invites them in to eat her furniture and sends them off to sleep in her marshmallow beds. Frightening claws emerge from the bed and grab Hansel as the bed swallows him whole. He wakes up in an empty room where an eerie gingerbread man forces Hansel to eat him. Hansel eats most of the gingerbread man but is unable to finish him. The witch reveals her plan to bake Hansel and Gretel. Gretel manages to save Hansel as the two of them manage to trap the witch in the oven. The candy house melts and a toy bird appears to take Hansel and Gretel back to their home where their father is waiting for them. The toy bird reveals itself to be filled with money and the family is free to live a happy life once again. After that, you'll probably have more questions than you had before. This was made in the early days of Tim Burton when he was still making shorts and had yet to make his first feature film, Pee-wee's Big Adventure. This is a post-Vincent pre-Frankenweenie short, so Burton was just starting to collaborate more with Disney. His only Disney project before this was work as an uncredited animator on The Fox and the Hound. There are a lot of things about this short that kids would find to be rather creepy if it weren't obvious enough already.
Hi.
Tim Burton's style is something I would usually describe often as being creepy but cute. In the opening scene showing off the toys the father made is where this style is made the most clear. Watching it now, it's instantly recognizable as being a Tim Burton short, though at the time kids had not yet had that exposure to Tim Burton that pretty much everyone does today. There's a lot of smaller moments in this that feel very Burton-y, but a lot of those lean more towards the creepy than the cute. I'm sure the hand puppet that the father uses was meant to be kind of cute, but given how little we knew about Tim Burton's style back then, this must have been terrifying.
She's not here with us now. Maybe someday she'll go away. For now, just close your eyes and wish her away. Someday we'll all be safe again. Close your eyes and I'll sing you a song.
The candy house the kids visit has this unsettling nature to it. I think a lot of people just picture the house to be like a gingerbread house in different adaptations of this story. It's clear that Tim Burton wanted to do something different with it, and while he does accomplish that, the idea of the house being filled with colorful fluids ends up being very unappetizing. I get the same feeling watching them eat that house that I do watching a David Cronenberg film. If anyone out there has a candy addiction and needs to get rid of it, watching this is the way to do that.
Go right ahead, dig in.
Then there's the gingerbread man near the end of the short, or as he refers to himself,
I'm Dan, the gingerbread man.
definitely a product of Tim Burton, but his whole appearance is rather unsettling and very uncomfortable. If his look was not enough to creep out viewers, there's also a lot of these strange sexual undertones used. Dan the gingerbread man comes off more as a pedophile than a cookie.
If you think I'm tasty and you want my body, come on, Hansel, take a bite.
I do not understand that decision, but if Burton's idea was to just freak kids out, he more than accomplished that goal. The witch herself is pretty terrifying too, but that seems to be a common trait with all witches in fairy tales and media. Hansel and Gretel is one of the few grim fairy tales not to be heavily changed by Disney, and is one of the few to remain fairly dark. As a matter of fact, this actually is Disney's version of Hansel and Gretel. There's a lot of bizarre choices made in this. You may be asking why Tim Burton chose to go with an Asian cast, or why it is the witch has ninja star cookies and candy cane nunchucks. Yes, that's something I didn't yet mention about this short. The odd thing about this is that part of Burton's reasoning for all of these decisions is that he had an obsession with Japanese culture at the time. That explains the strange toys, as those feel quite inspired by Japanese culture, but there's one small detail that Burton seemed to miss. Kung Fu is Chinese culture. Now, despite that detail, it's still easy enough to see where he was coming from and why he wanted to incorporate such strange ideas into his version of the fairy tale, and if he hadn't added those kinds of things, the short would not be nearly as interesting as it turned out. Now, there is a lot of speculation as to why the short went missing for so long. The most shared guess as to why was that the short was simply too bizarre for Disney standards, and Disney being, well, Disney, probably didn't really know what to do with something so unusual, so they hid it away. But I don't believe that that's actually the case, because this was released in a period of time when Disney actually wanted to make darker films for kids. Just 2 years before this short, they had released their first horror film, A Watcher in the Woods. And the same year as the short, they had released an adaptation of the Ray Bradbury novel, Something Wicked This Way Comes, and in 1985 they released both Black Cauldron and Return to Oz in the same year. So I don't quite think it was that Disney didn't want anyone to see it, rather they had no real reason to ever release it. A lot of film media has been lost to the Disney vault over time, and Tim Burton's Hansel and Gretel was sadly just one of those. A lot of ideas in this film would be carried over to Burton's later movies. The similarities are probably most notable with Burton's first film, Pee-wee's Big Adventure, which would feature the use of toys and inventions, and despite being a film mostly geared towards kids, still had a lot of surreal and frightening imagery, whether it be clown doctors or Large Marge.
It looked like this!
Despite how much I've been discussing the creep factor of this film, I personally don't find it to be that scary. If anything, it's actually kind of charming, and a lot of that comes from understanding who the director is. I think a lot of media generally becomes less frightening the more you learn about it and how it was made. I remember watching Eraserhead for the first time and thinking it was the scariest film I had ever seen, but after learning more about who David Lynch is and watching his other films, I started to find the film more fascinating than scary. This short does have its darker moments, but it ends on a happy note that kind of makes up for all of the misfortune that Hansel and Gretel go through. It's a lot like the animator Don Bluth's philosophy, where you can show kids like a lot of dark content as long as you have that happy ending. I also really admire the piano music played throughout this film. It gives kind of a comforting, like, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood feel. It's Tim Burton's early work, and while it's not perfect, you still gotta love it for its overall strangeness. As of lately, I've seen Tim Burton getting a lot of hate. People often criticize his most recent work or accuse him of being too gimmicky, which I don't completely disagree with those people, but I don't think it's right to hate on a director just because their later work isn't on par with their early work. A lot of directors seem to suffer this same kind of peer pressure, constantly trying to capture that magic they once had. Tim Burton has already accomplished so much in his lifetime, and instead of hating on his most recent work, we should be looking to all of the great films he has already given us. And that's not to say that Tim Burton does not still deliver on a good film from time to time. Sweeney Todd and Frankenweenie are both films that I really enjoy and can recommend to people. Hansel and Gretel is a very interesting look into Burton's thought process before his transition into theatrical films. It's a hidden little gem that we're grateful to have again after years of being lost. If you are a Burton fan, be sure to check it out. It's weird, creepy, creative, and really worth a look. Thank you for watching this video, and I'll be seeing you all again soon. Goodbye.